So, and it's for members of all three of our networks. We're not recording the breakout rooms, by the way, so there will be breakout rooms involved. That's not recorded. Welcome to Geraldine, again, one of our favourite speakers, Geraldine Haley. Geraldine is a member of our new virtual faculty, of which more later in the year. Geraldine is an executive leadership coach, a mentor, a psychologist by training. She started a career in the public sector before moving into FMCG and financial services in global roles in talent management, exec development and others with Standard Chartered Bank, where she worked very closely with the executive leadership team. So the plan for today is Geraldine is sharing insights from a case study of hybrid working. Then there's going to be a conversation in pairs and breakout rooms, and Geraldine will take you through the plan for that a little bit later on, and then we'll be back. There's a Q&A before that as well, by the way, and then we'll go in for a short discussion at the end, and perhaps a little bit of a what next from Geraldine with a half finish at 12 noon. So I'm going to invite you to pin Geraldine so you can still see her if you sort of click on her those three buttons on the right of her top right of her picture, and I'm going to share the slides that she has. Bear with me a second, which are here. And Geraldine.
Yes. Can I say hello and welcome to everybody? You're very welcome to turn your self view off. I'm going to try and do two things. Oh, we need everyone muted as well.
Oh, yes, sorry, I forgot to say.
Thank you. We're going to do two things this morning. I'm going to invite you to think differently about the transition to hybrid working. I'm going to use a live case study. Just actually straight before this, I had a call with the CEO of that organization. So this is really, really live. And at the same time, I want to introduce you to some of the concepts around a thinking environment, which has been introduced into this organization as part of hybrid working. And they've just committed to training all of their line managers in creating a thinking environment. We've been experimenting with it during remote working really successfully. So I want to give you a little taste of that as well. So there's lots of practical things today. The slides are available afterwards. I'm going to be super fast, very calm, but I'm not going to read the slides out. I'm just going to pick out some key points in the slides, knowing that you're probably speed readers. And of course, you can ask me some questions. You can always connect with me afterwards if you want to have a longer conversation. So this is the order of events. Let me start by just suggesting there may be two things you want to read. These are the two best articles I found. The first was a really interesting data-based article by Microsoft. And they really focused on these 7 key hypotheses, which they think are data-backed. Really interesting that the 30,000 people they surveyed globally, 41% suggested they were at an inflection point, and a much higher percentage of Gen Z were making concrete plans to change their employer. But around that, here were the 7 key things they got from their data. I'm just going to pick out probably 2 or 3 of them. Point number 2, their data showed that many leaders who were sitting in remote working in nicer environments at home underestimated the challenges that their employees were having and are now feeding back in terms of well-being issues, online fatigue, and overwork. And the second point is point number 3, which is many companies sort of reported with glee that they had higher productivity during remote working. And what this study showed very clearly is that that was at the expense of work-life boundaries being blurred, employees being expected to be on call for much, much longer. And that was proven by their data, mainly around chats and teams, where they said, of course, you'd expect, I don't know, it was 150%, increase in uptake. But the interesting thing was how many team calls were being put in outside of normal hours in that environment or country, and how many online chats were being responded to at antisocial hours in that country, because there was almost an on-call kind of environment. I think the third point is that at the start of lockdown, the data showed that organizations, people in remote working were networking much more actively to stay in touch with everyone. But as time went on, those networks for individuals were shrinking, and it's possible that organizations going into hybrid will become more siloed. A little bit more on that in the second article, which is by Linda Grattan. Now, Linda is the professor of, I think, management practice now at London Business School. And she's very good, as many professors are, at reading all the research that's around and then building her own model. It is a good article. It's an HBR kind of mini article. And she draws out 4 key things. I'm going to say a little bit more about these later on. But I think the most interesting two things that came out of this, I think. One is that hybrid working is going to have 2 components to it. Most people are thinking about the home and the office dimension to it. Bless you, whoever that is. I'd be very grateful if you went on mute. Thank you. And the other dimension of hybrid working is about flexible hours. So in essence, hybrid working probably needs to take account of location and hours. And some organizations I've spoken to have said, no, it's just about location. We've got a separate flexible working policy, that's fine. No, you need to bring them together. They need to intertwine here. And the second thing is that she's very clear, and we've picked this up in my case study, that you have to look at the jobs first. As much as you want to be people-centric, you have to look at what does the job demand. If it's okay for the job to be totally remote, great. But for many professional jobs, and I have been looking only at professional jobs in a financial services company, that's my case study, there are very few totally remote jobs. By remote, I mean any hours, any place. You could have a remote job that's any place, but not any hours, because that job has to connect with other jobs. So the people have to be able to connect. Their working hours have to overlap. You have to have what's called synchronized time. There's a lot of lingo coming out of hybrid working, in case you haven't picked it up, and I'll try and quickly tell you what they are as we go through, but synchronized time is one of them. You have to be really clear, what is the minimum synchronized time you need between roles, because those flexible hours have to allow for that, and location may also have to allow for it. They're the key decisions you have to make. Really interesting article, both of them. I have done a little bit of benchmarking, sponsored by my case study company. I only spoke to 4 now, international financial services organizations. So it's a very, very skewed sample. They purposefully all have offices in Canary Wharf and the city, because that's where my client is based. They are financial sector organizations. They're high engagement organizations. They're very good with their people processes. So it's a very limited sample, just so that you know. I've put the main things down here. I was quite surprised. 2 of the companies, one of them I can name, Standard Chartered Bank, it is my old stomping ground. I mean, they've actually not only re-agreed legal contractual contracts that include flexibility on location and hours way before anyone else, but they also have mapped all of their jobs against a matrix of location and hours. And another company that doesn't want to be named in my survey has done the same thing, and they've been transparent about the data. So people can see, for this job, this is how it's mapped for location and hours flexibility. And for that job, that's how it's mapped. They've actually been transparent with the data. That is the most scientific approach that I've seen to it. They're all restacking their offices. They're all enticing people back into the office in stages, but they're not being hard-lined prescriptive. But when you get below the surface, they say, well, by the end of the year, we're probably hoping that staff will be back in the office 2 days a week. KPMG have gone, well, we're in my sample, and they have gone public to say 4 days a fortnight, which gives more flexibility. So they have expectations that the offices will stay. They've been restacked for fewer people. They've got more collaboration areas. And actually, I don't know if you know, but KPMG have got an app now for employees. You go on the app and you say, I'd like to come into the office tomorrow. you have to give a reason. I want to meet colleagues, I have a meeting, I just want some connection, or whatever it is. And then that gives you a space in the office booked for you. I mean, that's quite sophisticated. So I just wanted to say that my little sample's quite limited, but quite a few learnings out of that. So let me tell you a little bit about the case study, because this is probably the interesting thing. So it sits in that sample. It's in the financial services type of sector. It is international, but I'm just working with the UK. Joe, I think, could you go on mute, please? Thank you. I'm just working with the UK division. And this company was lucky because when the first kind of COVID lockdown global challenge came, the CEO came right out the stocks and said, all I care about is that you stay at home and you look after yourself and your families. Don't worry about this business. This business will survive. We've been here for a long time. We'll get through this. I'm only interested in you looking after yourselves. And that allowed these leaders in the UK market to have a lot of discretion about what they allowed people to do and not do. And they genuinely last year took the pressure off business performance. And to a large extent, as far as I know, they were quite generous with bonuses. I said protected there, but they certainly were. Were generous. So now, right now, where they are is that globally, and this is run from the States, there is a kind of global guideline coming out of 2 to 3 days back in the office, probably from next year. I think they came out a bit early with a global guideline, if you want my honest opinion. I think it's caused a little bit of disturbance. They have restacked the office. And they are giving a lot of local discretion, which is why I'm now working with the CEO and the executive team in the UK to figure out what are they going to do. So we had a whole day together this week. And I think this is the interesting stuff. So I'm going to whiz into the interesting stuff. They're going to be very, very low key for the next probably 6 weeks. They're really only focusing on deciding as a top team what they're going to role model from the top. They've agreed some leadership principles that are going to guide all their decisions as things get a little bit maybe tougher from September onwards. And they're only encouraging people to come back to the office for interesting things, not necessarily to work, to see friends, to have a lunch, to do something different in the office. They've built some charitable donation type events. They just want to make it fun and enticing. From September, what we're planning to roll out together is a one-to-one exploratory conversation that has optionally for every employee a self-directed well-being plan. They do not have to disclose it to their employer, but it might be good for them to work through it themselves. And from those exploratory conversations, they will have all the data around needs and expectations for location flexibility and hour flexibility. And then each senior team leader will look at that data and decide what they need to do based on job demands and the demands for synchronized working, either within the team or across teams. But it's going to be done on a very inclusive basis, which is kind of part of their culture. And the thing I'm sort of proud of with them is they're going to offer every team leader some training around how to take your team from remote into hybrid. And it's based on a digital workbook. It's a self-directed workbook. And I'm going to show you a little bit about the workbook as well as in a minute. So I think they're doing it differently. So if you're going to take your team from remote into hybrid working, of course, the basic stuff exists and always will do. You have to have your objectives, you have to know the values and the culture and the informal rules that go around. And you need to help your team understand how to set their objectives within the strategy and the purpose and the mission of the organization. That's foundation stuff. That's what we've been doing before the pandemic. Nothing changes there. But what I've done with them is I've tried to help them understand what are the key practices that need to be embedded if you're going to take your team from remote to hybrid working, which is the next slide. And I have come up with, based on reading, benchmarking, and my experience of team coaching, particularly through remote working, there are 7 core practices that will differentiate the performance of teams that want to build productivity, engagement, and well-being in hybrid working. And these are the 7 practices. Now, they look intuitive, and they probably are intuitive, and I haven't got time to go through every single one today, but I'm going to show you just one of them. I think the one we're going to show you is synchronized time. So the way the self-directed workbook works, this is an actual page from it, is each practice has a clear outcome. It just explores what the opportunity is for investing time in this outcome. And then it provides you with a simple checklist of things you can think about to explore with yourself as a team leader. Are these things that I do already, in which case, great. Or are these things I need to invest some time in, because these will help me build effective synchronized time in my team, which is one of the practices. And I've just shown you a little bit of the checklist. There are another 4. The checklists are quite short. You know, the whole checklist approach from, is it Atul Gawande? I can never quite say his name. And obviously all the self-directed learning techniques are in here. And then there are reflective questions that you have an opportunity to action plan on. So I picked this one. I picked that one on synchronized time because I think it's pivotal in the research I've read. You have to be clear what is the protected time, you could call it, or synchronized time you want your team to be together. You probably did it in remote working by saying, guys, I need you all on a Thursday from midday to 2, probably not then because of nurseries, but maybe it was from 2 to 4 in order to have a team meeting. You must have had some protected time rules, but synchronized time is a little bit more focused than that. And there are 7 practices that I think are really important. So I thought, okay, sorry, let me just tell you this. So how it's going to be launched is, they're not going to say to a team leader, gosh, here's the workbook, get on with it. They're going to say, you need to take a section of the workbook. There's 3 sections every month. And within that month, we will offer you 2 clinics you can join if you want to. And we're going to invite you into an action learning set, which will go over 3 months so that the team leaders can share their experiences, can bring challenging questions into a clinic. And they're going to offer all team leaders a thinking environment training seminar. And we're going to experiment with a little bit of that today. Why? Because the training environment practices absolutely create an inclusive environment, and they create productive and generative thinking. I've proved it in remote working. It's been spectacular. And I just want to give you a little bit of a taste of it. I don't own this. This is the Nancy Klein work. I just happen to be licensed as a facilitator. So that's what they're doing very thoughtfully. And to be helpful to you, I just thought I would ask you, invite you, if you like, to ask yourself some questions. So these are questions that are linked to the 7 practices. And I'm just inviting you to have a read of these, and you'll get these slides. You can do this in quality time, nice glass of wine in your hand, perhaps on a nice day in the garden, and just test yourself to what extent you believe now that your teams are able to do these things and you're doing these things with them. And perhaps this would give you just a little bit of a steer as to where you might want to take your attention over the next couple of months as you go into a hybrid environment. And these really, there's not 7 questions, there's not 1 for each practice, there's 11 questions, but I've just picked out some key points from the practices that might be useful to you. Let me just pick one out. Number 3, we've gone totally into online video meetings. We seem to have forgotten the art of just a quick telephone call with somebody. We tend to use online video meetings to give a lot of information out when people can read emails. We can ask people to look at documents and comment on them first. But everything seems to have gone. I've noticed that with my clients. Every little call now is a Zoom invite or a Teams invite. And I don't want to be on video all day, and a lot of people don't. So there's a little practice in the workbook that says, just remember, there's right things for right outcomes. So there's some communication practice checklists that you can go through. So just the next slide are some more questions. Let me mention fault lines. This is jargon, but it's important jargon because it's in all the research. As you move into hybrid working, your team will develop their own fault lines, their own them and us groups. The obvious one is people in the office and people not in the office. People dressing up a little bit more to be in the office because they might meet a big boss versus people still in t-shirt and shorts, not in the office and feeling a bit left out. Fault lines between people in different countries or people in different work groups who have different work practices. We're together more because we've got more synchronized time. We're more important. You guys are more remote. You don't need synchronized time. We don't need to include you. Identifying and managing the fault lines that will develop in your team that will change from the fault lines you have now is going to be really important. That's why I've just mentioned it right now. So that is the end of the quick whiz through. Before I take you into a thinking environment exercise, I'm going to pass back to you, Richard, for a time check, but also do we have a little bit of time, hopefully, for some questions? It would be great to hear from some of the people investing in this time and just take a couple of questions if that works, Richard.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Geraldine. What I love about that is the thought, care, and the richness of it, the detail of it, really, and in terms of thinking about what hybrid working actually means. So, yes, love to hear some questions. Let's start off with Rachel, actually. Rachel, thank you. Nice to see you again. Is an action learning set practical exercises to help people apply their learning? Rachel asks.
Is what, sorry, Richard, is the what? Is the action learning set?
Yeah, just a quick definition of action learning sets, essentially.
Yes.
Is it practical?
Yes. So in an action learning set, we're talking about having 5 people who come together to bring a challenge that they've been facing as a team leader going into hybrid working. And the group then decides which 1 or 2 challenges they're going to work on together. You have a facilitator, and the facilitator enables that group to do some thinking together to help the 2 questions that have come into the group that are real questions. So it's not a teach-in, it's not a seminar, but it's a peer learning set that has some real interesting facilitation techniques around it, so you need a facilitator. But yes, that as well as a clinic, which is a bit more one-on-one. This is what I need to find out. Can you tell me more about? So this client is going to experiment with both techniques in the next 3 months.
That help, Rachel?
Great, thanks, Geraldine. Yeah, that was really helpful. I just wasn't familiar with that language, but that sounds really good. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Other questions? Do raise your hand if that's helpful. Anyone doing anything like this already, or part of it, or all of it?
We're doing bits of it, so it's nice to see some of the stuff, Geraldine, where there's ideas that we're thinking on those lines too, but it's also really great to get some inspiration for some of the other bits that you're talking about. So we've done some sort of managers immersion sessions on how to approach hybrid working and leveraging hybrid teams. Some of the headlines overlay with some of the concepts you're talking about as well. So really great to hear your ideas.
Thank you.
We've been doing something similar, Richard. We've put together a hybrid working guide for both managers and employees, and have provided managers with a framework for what we're calling team agreements, so that managers and teams can sit down and discuss many of the topics that you list, actually, Geraldine, you know, like how will we work in this new way of working? Are we already working it already? Which aspects of hybrid working do we really want to retain? How do we make sure it's inclusive if some of us are here or some of us aren't? Interestingly, what we're learning is the importance of just the one-on-one conversations with a manager and employee, less so actually about the team arrangements, you know, that feels easier. It's actually about creating the psychological safety for some to have a discussion around what does a flexible working pattern look like for you? What kind of pattern do you want your work to look like? And based on that, how do we facilitate it? I think that's really the where the rubber's hitting the road. I mean, the biggest challenges we're having moreover in this model is just people wanting to work in countries where which are different from where their work is legally required, so where expectations, I think, are out of alignment with just good compliant business practices. I think that's one element, and then the other is across not at all in the UK, but across some of the other smaller countries where we operate, is just whether or not we've got all of the legal policies required for the degree of flexibilities that we're talking about, and ensuring that we've got part-time policies and understand the legal documentation required. You want to try and manage as much of this naturally, but some of the European countries that have got more stringent socialist type requirements, do require a lot more process and documentation than perhaps we would fit with our culture in this respect. But certainly interesting times.
Yeah. I think with this client, they are going to have those exploratory one-on-one conversations, and I think you're all doing that, I'm sure. What I like about this is they've got this self-directed well-being plan that an individual can work through to really think about, how can I build my well-being based on all the research. What are the there's 7 again, believe it or not, 7 foundations of well-being, and they don't have to disclose that, but it might give them some thinking time and think through. I have got some more optionality actually with what I can do. I'm not feeling so stressed about my manager telling me I have to do some stuff. I can work around things a little bit more. So I think that trying to build that flexibility, and it's great. I'm looking at the chat as well. It's this is such an opportunity for enabling team leaders and managers to create a different environment. I mean, I think it's a leadership moment for HR people actually to not go back to how things were before the pandemic. Nobody's saying that, but worst case is some employees are thinking it's going to go back to that. It isn't going to go back to that. I don't think any of us are aiming for that. I think we're aiming for a more person-centric, flexible and effective environment for younger generations to feel listened to, valued and cared for. And if there ever that we've had a context moment that gives us that opportunity as HR people to have a voice to say, we need to change things now, this is our time. I think this is our time to do that. And those of you that have got baby boomer big bosses at the top, you will have some resistance. I've seen it in other clients where the baby boomer big bosses want to go back in the office and they want their minions around them, and they want to look important again, and they want the hierarchy again. And I don't think the office environment is going to be like that ever again. So I think we have a bit of a Churchill moment going on here, and I'm delighted to see how much is happening here. It's really exciting.
We have, I know you want to get to talking through the thinking time and the thinking questions, Geraldine. So, but there's 2 questions that I hope we can come back to afterwards. There's one from Tath on the interplay between core hours and synchronized time, and from Lisa too on detailed role mapping. Who is the decision maker on this, and how do we ensure conclusion? So let's just hold those for now. I'll get the slides deck back up, and then you can take the group through the next discussion.
Yeah. So for those of you who I know some people have got to duck out, but I was really hoping to give you a very short introduction to creating a thinking environment. This is the Nancy Klein work. Many of you may be familiar. It's all written in her books. I don't know if anyone here has also been trained in the technique, but I think she's missed a trick, because I took this into remote working with teams, and I've been astounded and delighted with the results it's had with remote teams. And I believe that it will still create much value for particularly hybrid teams. So I just want to give you a tiny taste today. I hope a taste is good, but it only gives you a tiny bit of the jigsaw. So essentially, her practices are all around building equality in meetings, where participants understand what it takes to give real attention and everyone equal time. And I mean equal time. And possibly the most important thing is you do not interrupt anybody. So you actually don't have many free conversations. The conversations are easeful, but they're run in a different way. And we're not doing this today, but typically what you do is you have a meeting table and you give everyone a seat on the table. And that is the order of speakers. So whoever goes first will then pass on to somebody clockwise or anti-clockwise. And whatever question or conversation you're having, you give everyone equal time. And typically, if you invite somebody to go first, the extroverted thinker goes first. And they're normally people who process out loud. So they tend to take up a lot of time. So you have to moderate the time everyone can have. And the CEO of my client, just before this call, was saying, that's the biggest change I've noticed with our wonderful extrovert thinker, who is now very mindful of the time he takes, doesn't go first, and doesn't interrupt people anymore. And it's given everyone else psychological safety to feel that they can open up and share their thoughts as well. So we're going to practice a little bit of this today. That we're just looking at these four. So how you give attention on a video, creating some equality, not interrupting, and a little bit of ease, although I appreciate time is limited, and her way of showing appreciation. We're going to do all of those things. So let me tell you a little bit more about the challenge of giving attention. So I'm going to invite you into one of her practices, which is called a thinking pair. And we're going to do a quick version of a thinking pair. In order to do that, you'll go into a breakout room with a partner. We can look at the next slide, Richard, thank you. We'll go into a breakout room with a partner, and it would be great to turn your video on to just experience this, because you're used to remote working with videos on. And the challenge here is that if you're going to invite your partner to create some trust with you quickly, who you don't know today, the only way of doing it in the time we've got is to give them your absolutely full attention. And the best way of doing it, and I struggle with it, is you need to look at the camera, not the screen. If you look at the camera, you will be looking into the eyes of the other person rather than looking at them generally. But that's quite difficult to do because you might want to see some non-verbal cues. However, please don't multitask, because subconsciously your partner will be noticing whether you're giving full attention or not. If you are, you will be encouraging them to be a little bit more open. It's all subconscious, by the way. Or they might just give you something that's quite superficial rather than deeper thinking. And of course, as I've said earlier, you're not going to interrupt them. And we'll tell you how a thinking partner works in a sec. At the end of your thinking partner exercise, you're going to offer your partner some appreciation. So on the next slide, you'll see that Nancy's way of giving appreciation is literally in one sentence, and it's just sincere, succinct, and specific. I appreciate in this conversation that you shared with me how you're feeling about hybrid working. It's something that's sincere, succinct, and specific. As long as it's that, you don't have to, it's literally a sentence, it's very quick, but I'd like you to feel the value of having that positive affirmation from somebody. And we now build it in regularly in team meetings so that people have the opportunity to give appreciation, which is so easy to do, and it has a big impact. You feel generous, but it has a bigger impact as well on receiving it. So this is how the thinking pair will work. We're going to invite you into a breakout room with one other person, an A and a B. We're going to invite you to share your thoughts with your thinking partner for 3 minutes. And then we're going to give you a time check to swap. So during the 3 minutes, all you do for your partner who's talking, so if you're A, you're going to simply ask the question, what is your freshest thinking about how to support effective hybrid working in your organization? You can add, tell me your thoughts if you want to. That's all you have to do. And then for 3 minutes, if you're A, you just have to give B your fullest online attention and allow them 3 minutes. It's possible that B won't talk for 3 minutes. Don't jump in. Don't ask them another question. Just give them the gift of silence and peace so that they can carry on thinking and hopefully carry on talking. And then at the end of that time, you will simply swap round and B will ask A, so what is your freshest thinking about how to support effective hybrid working in your organization? And you carry on for three minutes. So we're going to do 3 minutes each way. I think that will be enough, Richard, because we can have more discussion afterwards. So it's 1 round each. At the end of 3 minutes each way, you offer each other some appreciation, which is a sentence. So you're going to be in your room for maximum 9 minutes, because you probably just want to say, oh, hello, you know, I'm Joe, maybe which organization you're representing. But please practice the full attention and the no interruption, and experience the benefit of just having that trust and psychological safety and space to think out loud, to just let your thoughts tumble out. You're not making a speech. They don't have to make any sense. You don't have to come to a conclusion. It's really just a safe space to think. And that's the first part of the practice, which we're going to try right now.
Sorry.
So we've come back to the, I've got a choice. We've only got 10 minutes left. I'd be more than happy to take a question about this little practice. And I do hope that the content was helpful, because it gave you a time to process and start thinking for yourselves. We're clearly, as a group, all moving in the same direction, but I'm hoping that some little nuggets of gold came up as you had the chance to think them through. So let's Richard, I suggest let's just open it up for a few more questions. I know there are a couple carried over from last time, so we can have a question about hybrid working or a question about the practice. I won't do justice to the role mapping, because I haven't seen in my benchmark study, I haven't seen who's done it well. Standard Chartered Bank have done it. I don't know if they've put anything in the public domain. The other organization I'm not allowed to name, they've also done it. What they described to me was literally a spreadsheet where they put some key questions down that allowed each role to be mapped against. And I'm sure we could make the questions up if we had half an hour together, but you can imagine what they are. You know, is this a role where the individual is an individual contributor and does an awful lot on their own, versus is this a role which has to collaborate with a lot of other people? And can that collaboration happen remotely, or do they have to be together? Is this a role that requires creative thinking, in which case, are we prepared to manage that remotely? Linda Grattan says you can't do it remotely. You can with the time to think practices. I've done it. But most of the research says if you want real collaboration and creativity, you have to bring people back together. It doesn't have to be the office, but it needs to be physical together. I don't believe that's true based on my own work, but nevertheless, there's some of the criteria that you would work through. I'm sorry, I don't have a sample to share with you, but the case study client isn't going down to that level of detail yet. They're doing it at a high level, but not at what they're doing is, if I can put it this way, they're looking at outlier jobs that could be totally remote. And therefore not need to be in the office, because they know they've got to get most people back into the office. They're only really trying to identify the remote jobs that don't have to come into the office at all, but they're doing it that way by exception. So that's the best answer I can give you on that one. The synchronized time is the same as, if you like, core time. So the idea is that you look within your team to say, I am going to have some protected time or core time when I need people to be available, either with me for a team meeting, or because it's a project they've got to talk about together, or I just want to protect some problem solving time for them together. And in the workbook, one of the practices is about mapping into dependencies with other teams, so that you're not just looking at what does my team need to do together, but you're able to look at and say, we know that in order to deliver this project, this team has to interact with that team. So I need to understand, how has that been working remotely? Do they just work it out? Or do we need to do some contracting about some core time together so we can review the project, we can do some problem solving, and we can do some future thinking? So kind of, you know, project tracking, problem solving, future thinking. You can define some activities that you think are important to have on your protected or synchronized time list, either within your team or with other teams. Of course, we just try and keep it simple, but that's the sort of way that this approach is working with this particular client. They're taking that part quite seriously.
Any other questions or points people would like to raise?
I've just picked up one. I love this one, the no meetings. Yeah, I mean, it would just be great to share some really simple little things that you've done that have really increased engagement, productivity and well-being, like the no meetings afternoon. This client has a no Zoom, no video meetings on a Monday morning, I think it is. They've also given people Friday afternoons back just for a period of time to say thank you for all their hard work that you've done during the last lockdown particularly. But just those little things mean so much to people. So I think it's great. If anyone's got any of those, do put them in the chat room. It'd be lovely to just be able to share them.
Jo, do you find people are respecting it? Are they respecting the no meetings?
They are, but they're also flexible with it. So if there is something urgent, people will ask, would you mind me having a little bit of your no meetings time? And if it's something urgent, people will usually agree to it. But it's not about people not communicating or collaborating. It's more about, don't put that performance meeting in that happens every month on that day. Don't expect that you can get hold of people, because I think we're all feeling a bit sort of Teams fatigued, in all honesty, and that's part of the reason why we've done it, to try and sort of create that space within the working week for everyone. But we find that people are really respectful. If you do need to use someone's time, you usually ask permission, and they will be free to say yes or no. You know, I've reserved that for something else, or yeah, I'm really happy to do a piece of work with you. So in the main, it is. There are times where, for example, we've got some reorganisation work going on at the moment where obviously every moment counts. But yeah, in the main, it's worked well.
Yeah. And what's the difference you feel that it's made to people?
I think it's knowing that you've got that break during the week, the fact that it's partway through the week where you can say, okay, so I can keep stuff that I need to get some headspace on for Wednesday. So you can plan. It helps you to plan throughout the week, I think, more effectively. But I think the main thing is just not being back to back on Teams. Which is something that we are a really interconnected organisation. So there isn't really anyone who does the job on their own. You always have to do something with somebody else. And because collaboration is sort of our culture, it's a really positive part of our culture. But of course, in a virtual world, it can be quite draining. So it's protecting some of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Jo. Geraldine.
The 50 minutes instead of the hour. So this is a really interesting.
We've done that as well. Yeah, we've done that. So we automatically set on Outlook. If you arrange a meeting, it will automatically take 5 minutes off a 30-minute meeting or 10 minutes off an hour meeting. And it gives you a little warning to say in 5 minutes your meeting is ending. Yeah, so wrap it up. That's been really good as well.
I think we have to wrap up as well, sadly, don't we, Richard?
I was just going to say, I think you wanted to finish with, is it that one? Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, the chat room, I hope we can read the chat room properly, because it was lots of great stuff in there. So, you know, I don't know if there's any, what's the new thing is, you know, if you want to refer back to it, I really do believe there are 7 core practices. And if all of your guidelines and stuff focuses on those, you're there. But I have tried to distill it from all the practices and research that I've read. A little taster on the thinking environment, which I think on face-to-face meetings, it was all done in face-to-face meetings, but I think it works remotely, and I think it will be hugely beneficial when you've got some people sitting together and some people not sitting together. And more importantly, it allows collaboration and new thinking without having everyone face-to-face. Yeah, we're experimenting with different ways of supporting team leaders in this huge transition, keeping it to a digital workbook, to action sets, to clinics, to obviously access to HR people, but we wanted to relieve the HR partner from fielding every single question and query that could come up, because it's a full-time job. So they've got this little support network available externally, just to help team leaders get settled with it in the first 3 months. Well, we were just saying thank you for all of you. I think 29 people joined today, so it's clearly very topical. I can see from the chat room, you're all doing some great stuff. I said to Richard, could we find a way to let you share what you're doing so that you can learn from each other as well? But I hope this is helpful today. So I'll sign off, Richard, and give back to you. Thank you, everyone. Wishing you a great August and hopefully some good staycation time.